Throughout the ages, since time immemorial, before the first game master crawled out of the primordial ooze, there has been one question that has plagued us all. And that question is, how do you get your players to do what you want? Let's face it, to keep a story cohesive, it needs direction. We tend to think of stories in the way that we're familiar with them, linear and point by point. Books, movies, video games, they're all built in a very similar fashion. Most of the stories that we consume are built beat by beat linearly towards their conclusion. This gives us a sense that to get to the conclusion, we have to steer each beat such that it aligns towards the ultimate goal. Tabletop RPGs are a different beast entirely. They seem to sit somewhere on the graph between movies and make-believe. If there was an analogous media type, I would say its closest cousin would be a stage play. Except everyone's ad-libbing their lines, no one's read the script, and it's possible that at least half the players are drunk. RPGs are a particular kind of magic. Everyone at the table is working together to spin this story. It relies on everyone contributing, at least in some way, for it to come off well. For you today, I have come up with a numbered list of the best ways for you to get your players to do what you want. Before we dive into this too deep, I want to take a second to establish the terms that we're playing with. Because, of course, before you ask the question, how do I get my players to do what I want? You have to ask yourself the question, what do I want my players to do? The easiest answer for this is, I want my players to play the game. I want my players to enter into this narrative with the same good faith engagement that they would give a book that they really, really enjoyed, or a movie that they are incredibly invested in. In situations like this, I find it very helpful to establish what we want the players to do and what we don't want to do ourselves. You've all heard the term railroading. This is kind of held up as the apotheosis of what you don't want to do as a dungeon master, but it can be helpful to examine what we actually mean by railroading. To illustrate what I mean by railroading, I want to dredge up a moment from my gaming history that you, hopefully, will never have to go through. So, let's set the scene. It's the early noughts. We're playing the then new Fantasy Flight Star Wars game. All of my players were bounty hunters tracking down a Trandoshan to their asteroid base. The players land, they investigate, droids shoot lasers, Wookiees yell, and they come out successful. Now, because I didn't really know what I was doing, and I had some vague notion that you still had to maintain some sense of dramatic tension, I suggested to the players that while they were in the Trandoshan's base, the Trandoshan had surreptitiously placed hidden explosives on or inside their ship. My players rolled the best roll they could have possibly rolled. Unfortunately for me, I needed their spaceship to crash for the story to work. So, despite all of their good work, their fantastic rolls, and their problem-solving abilities, their spaceship crashed anyway. I have never seen a table of people more upset, and I understand why. This was passive viewership as opposed to active engagement. The outcome was out of their control. I'm just going to read what I have written here as an example of what I mean when I say that this is railroading. Railroading is forcing the players to engage with the story or the world in a dictated way, preventing them from making their own choices. Passive viewership as opposed to active participation. So what's the opposite of that? What, in other words, are we trying to get our players to do? If railroading is forcing your players to participate in a course of action regardless of their choices, and coming to a predetermined conclusion without their input, then the opposite of that is allowing players the opportunity to participate equally in the execution of the game, facilitating player agency in the course of the narrative, and providing the flexibility for the player's mechanical performance to impact the course of events. This is you letting the players set their own lines and blocking, even though you're providing direction. So, given that the objective of a good tabletop role-playing game experience is to facilitate player agency and provide flexibility in the narrative for mechanical happenstance, the question still remains, how do you get your players to do what you want? Number 1, set the objective. Tell the players very early on what they're trying to do. You can do this in session 0 or early on in session 1. It can be something very concrete or something incredibly vague. Say you give your players the objective, remove the tyrannical king from power. Establishing this as the objective gives your players a context for their choices, a prompt to work from instead of trying to come up whole cloth with their version of what this game's course is supposed to be. This also gives players a chance to justify to themselves why their character would be pursuing this course of action. It doesn't matter to the structure of the plot why they're doing this, just that they are. So, what is the difference between this and railroading? Setting your player's objective at the outset is, well, let's be honest, it kind of is railroading. A little bit. You're establishing for your players what their eventual goal is going to try and be. But you're leaving it up to the players how they accomplish that goal. All of the other choices in the game are up to them. Even if they're working against the objective, they're still using the objective as a central pivot around which the narrative can spin. A unified context. The reason we want this little dash of railroading in our games is to take the narrative burden off of the players themselves. To give a framework through which they can explore their own stories. So, what makes a good objective? A good objective is clear and simple. Likewise, a good objective will have clear stakes, something that the players can grab onto as an idea of what will happen if they don't pursue this objective. And again, simpler is better. The easier that this is for your players to understand, the more able they will be to put themselves in the situation as their characters. Number 2, start with cooperation. Start your game after the scene in which all of the players meet in the tavern. Start the game with the assumption that everybody is on the same team. Likewise, as the game master, you can provide your players with a reason why they would all be on the same team. They don't have to agree with it 100%, that's up to their character entirely. But giving them that context for their choices throughout the course of the story allows your players a lot more freedom, kind of ironically. Starting from a point of assumed cooperation likewise gives players a chance to have common ground at the beginning of a game and takes away a lot of the pressure to railroad themselves into getting along. Building narrative is tough. It takes a lot of effort. Demanding that your players build that with each new game is asking them a lot. Because ultimately, if we're talking about railroading, it's stuff that doesn't make sense in the game. It's stuff that forces your players into a course of action that they don't think their character would take. If you leave it up to the players to decide how they all get together, you're kind of forcing them all to participate in a mishmash of different and possibly conflicting motivations and contexts. Providing them with that context takes that off of their plate and lets them just be their characters. The counterpoint to that, of course, is what if my character is the lone wolf of the lone wolves, the rogue's rogue, if you will. A tiefling, so outcast that even tieflings won't want them around. The answer to that? Cool. How does that character operate, given that you're already cooperating with all of the other players at the table? If you assume cooperation, then you've already set the parameters for behavior. Even if working with others isn't what my character would do, this at least provides a framework through which your character can still play at the table with other players. Remember, this is a tabletop game. There isn't a main character. And for your game to successfully happen, everybody has to have a chance to contribute. Establishing the fact that everyone is already cooperating lets everybody contribute in a way that they find most fitting. Number 3. Number 3. Make the world a character. Just like any of the player characters, the world at large should have thoughts, opinions, feelings, perspectives. It should have characteristics and flavors and on and on. Most importantly, a world should react to the players. This, more than anything else, gives players a sense of their impact in the world, a sense of investment. To jump right to the most extreme example, if your players are, quote, murder hobos, then the world should react to them as such. The important idea is that the world has an equal amount of say in the story as the characters. Not more than, but equal to. On the one hand, this gives players a sense of reality and consequence. On the other, it gives players something to play off of. It gives them cues for their characters to react to. People are empathetic creatures. If their actions happen in a vacuum, they don't have much to work on. If you ask yourself, why are the players at my table just being murder hobos? It might be because they don't have a sense that the world is real. They ask themselves, what happens if I just kill the storekeeper and steal all of his stuff? But if the halfling barkeep has a chance to say to the players, I don't like it that you burnt down my tavern, then they might think twice about burning down the next one. No matter what the players do over the course of the game, make sure that the world has character enough to react to it. Players have an easier time connecting to the game that you're presenting to them if they can see it in their mind. In each scene, the world should be something, regardless of what that something is. Number 4. You gotta make it to that fireworks factory. Remember to include a payoff. There's that Simpsons episode where Milhouse says, but when are they gonna get to the fireworks factory? That was my Milhouse impression. I hope you liked it. Regardless of how good or bad my Milhouse impression was, the same principle applies here. Regardless of what you're trying to get your players to do or where they're headed, they should see an exciting thing ahead of them, and they should eventually get there. To put it another way, in the course of a narrative, each session, each story beat, or each decision that a character makes is like putting a coin in a piggy bank. Eventually, you, as the dungeon master, are going to want to take that piggy bank and smash it on the ground. And feel free to play around with this. It doesn't have to be kept in reserve strictly for the main story beats. You can use this for a number of different situations. Just remember the rhythm. You get normal play, maybe some bad things happen, some regular things happen, some struggle, and then you're building up to it, and you're building up to it, and oh my god, there's a reveal. In other words, don't always have a payoff every session, but keep one in your pocket for the things that seem like the players are really into. Because this can be used for anything. If a player wants to explore their backstory, think about what the fireworks factory for that is. Or if there's that weird NPC that the players are all attached to, you can use that as a fireworks factory. Like, say, Boblin the Goblin is like running around and then he gets kidnapped! And then the players have to rescue him, and there's a final confrontation, and Boblin the Goblin starts like weeping tears of joy at seeing the players again. I'm looking at my script, and the title is Top 5 Things, but I think I only have 4. Number 5, always be yourself. Number 5 is A, B, C. Oh, wait. This is easier with a chalkboard. Ultimately, regardless of how many points this video has, getting your players to do what you want is all about providing the parameters for them to be able to work within. It's about taking the burden of the narrative development of the story off of their shoulders so they are free to be their characters any way they want to be. Whether it's providing an understood objective or allowing for the fact that they have all begun the game from a point of cooperation, providing incentive, whether it's narrative payoff or just a simple reaction from the world that they are participating in, getting your players to do what you want is a matter of telling them what they can do. That doesn't sound right. It's about giving them direction and reminding them of their agency. Ultimately, how do we get our players to do what we want? Give them something good to work with. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'm so glad to be making videos again after way too long. If you're interested in seeing more of this content, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and all of that good social media stuff. But additionally, did you know that I write Dungeons & Dragons adventures? I write a whole bunch of stuff under the pen name The Institute. You have to say it with an exclamation mark. The Institute! And you can find all of the stuff that I have released and all of the stuff that I have for sale on itch.io. You can find the link down in the description below. Or if you want to catch all of the releases month by month, you can find all of the new stuff rolling out, settings, classes for 5th edition, system agnostic stuff, as well as all of my main adventures on my Ko-Fi page, ko-fi.com/itstheinstitute. At the very least, I hope I catch you next time. Thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely evening, you wonderful people, you! Man, I feel like I spat a lot just then. A, B, C. Always be Cthulhu.